Welcome to Orthodox Library. In this video essay, we shall be exploring another side of our previous work regarding fake intellectualism in the online sphere, and we'll discuss two new aspects pertaining to it: the literacy rates and how it affects the Orthodox Church in the West. We shall provide timestamps in this video as well. Let's get straight into it. The Quiet Collapse: How Declining Literacy in the U.S. Affects Religious Engagement. Literacy in decline. Why it matters. As of the early 2020s, approximately 21% of adults in the United States of America struggle with basic literacy skills, according to the National Center of Education Statistics. This basically means that nearly 1 in 5 American adults cannot read at a level sufficient to complete common daily tasks. The average reading level among American adults is estimated to be between 7th and 8th grade, with even lower comprehension levels among younger generations that were brought up primarily consuming visual and digital media. Moreover, functional literacy, the ability to apply reading, writing, and numeracy skills in everyday context, is also declining, together with the lowering of attention span and critical thinking. Furthermore, this decline is not merely an educational crisis, but also a civilizational one, which involves all areas of the nation: cultural, political, spiritual, and institutional. A literate society is not just one that can understand systems of writing, but also one that can participate and contribute in rational discourse, intellectual activities, and reflective moral thought. As literacy declines, so too does the ability to engage with foundational texts, whether belletristic, historical, religious, or philosophical. This, in turn, has enormous implications for democracy, civic responsibility, and even the essence of the American political system. It also affects the health of the religious landscape in the West, which is traditionally rooted in careful reading of the Scripture, as per Protestant tradition. Recent data from the National Literacy Institute from 2024 to 2025 reveals that 54% of U.S. adults read below a 6th grade level, and 45 million are functionally illiterate, reading below a 5th grade level. This is the beginning of a national disaster. But don't worry, it gets worse. Among college students, the National Survey of America's College Students found out that while they generally outperform the broader adult population in literacy, significant problems still exist. Approximately 30% of the students in 2-year institutions and 20% in 4-year institutions possess basic or below basic quantitative literacy skills. Moreover, a 2024 survey by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni highlighted alarming gaps in civic knowledge among college students, many of which lacked basic information about founding fathers or the Constitution. These statistics highlight a worrying trend. Even among the educated, literacy levels are generally insufficient for deep engagement with complex texts or tasks. This decay of literacy skills negatively affects the ability to interpret Scripture, the writings of the Church Fathers, or to understand deep theological nuances. In Orthodox Christianity, while not primarily reliant on the rational aspect of faith, does, however, engage in religious study and utilizes liturgical text, so the decline in literacy can be problematic to the faithful that want to actively engage in intellectual and theological discourse. In the following chapters, we shall explore how the decline in literacy rates in the West impacts the religious landscape in general, and how it can affect orthodoxy in particular. Unless something happens within the next few years, we are heading towards a post-literate society in the United States, which will have ground-shattering effects further down the line, not only from a religious point of view, but also from a civilization lens. To some degree, religions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are dependent on textuality. They are grounded in sacred texts, preserved over centuries or millennia, and interpreted through commentary, theology, and tradition from each faith's authoritative individuals, such as church fathers from antiquity, rabbis from the Amoraim period, or the early Hadith writers and collectors. Historically, the ability to read and understand these texts, which include various complex issues, has been a relevant part of religious life, more or less depending on the religion, ranging from Judaism, where literacy is virtually essential, to Islam, where literacy is needed for memorizing the Quran, and finally, Christianity, in which literacy is required for higher intellectual inquiries about divinity, but not essential for practicing the faith fully. However, as literacy wanes, particularly in younger generations, fewer people will be able to engage directly with sacred texts, creating, thus, a rift between generations of believers. More and more, we are witnessing the rise of religious charismatic figures, social media influencers, or fake intellectuals, which aim to fill in a perceived void left by mainstream faiths, of people interested in religion but are not intellectually prepared. The consequences of the decline in literacy rates and in the rise of fake intellectualism are obvious. Religious beliefs built on sound bites, paraphrased doctrine, and simplified answers rather than thoughtful engagement with theology, scripture, or tradition. Another interesting development is that the famous motto of the Reformation, sola scriptura, or scripture alone, now faces an existential threat from functional illiteracy, which undermines the core values of Protestantism and aiding in the transformation of the post-Reformation churches and denominations into charismatic neo-Protestant movements, such as the Pentecostals. Moreover, diminished reading comprehension weakens the ability to interpret biblical allegories, metaphors, archetypes, and intertextuality, focusing instead on a more literalist approach that lacks any kind of nuance. When readers lose the ability to decode complex passages, interpretations become limited, simplistic, or altogether distorted. This, in turn, has wide-ranging implications for the theology, doctrine, and beliefs of the faithful, which tends to gravitate over newer types of interpretations, adapted to the world we live in, and ignores the writings and concepts of ancient church fathers. Parallel to the decline in literacy is the rapid rise of a culture centered on visual aspects rather than mental. Events such as YouTube sermons, TikTok testimonies, and Instagram-ready Bible verses are slowly taking over the traditional manner of conducting services and is aimed at a wider audience of interested but not committed individuals that want quick solutions. While this expands access to information to a lot of people, it also threatens to reshape the medium and, inevitably, dilute the message. Theology learned through deep study and reading books cannot be replaced by influences on TikTok, and the sacred aspects of liturgical practices cannot be swapped out by ad hoc YouTube devotional live streams from somebody's living room. This visual shift creates a religion of superficial impressions rather than well-thought-out convictions. In an ironic way, the age-old Protestant critique of apostolic churches regarding icons, sacred representations, and visual catechesis seems to no longer stand true in the face of the ever-growing reliance of similar but more simplistic methods employed by charismatic groups in evangelizing their messages. Thus, symbolic religious imagery replaces complex ideas that may no longer be fully understood nor important enough to be engaged with. The result of this degradation of society is a spiritual culture taught to be interested in sensationalism, susceptible to manipulation, and increasingly disconnected from doctrine or dogma. In the absence of textual literacy and the rise of fake intellectualism, positive emotional responses become the primary metric of spiritual truth and the way in which we discern which religion or faith is correct. Moreover, an even greater risk is transforming our faith into a sort of lifestyle accessory rather than a path towards God. Religious illiteracy does not exist in a vacuum, as it usually reflects a larger social trend within a nation. Generally speaking, religious illiteracy is downstream from the erosion of cultural and civic literacy. more and more people struggle to regularly read newspapers, legal documents, or even long-form fiction or novellas. Obviously, all civilizational elements, such as culture, institutions, religion, and socio-political systems, are intermixed with each other, and when one is being affected by something, then all the others suffer as a result. So, civic disengagement and religious disenchantment are mutually reinforcing and represent a sign of worry. Additionally, a citizenry that does not read may not vote responsibly or consciously, since they are at risk of being influenced or manipulated. This, unfortunately, represents an acknowledged negative trait of popular democracy, which maintains that the vote is equal among all citizens of a state. While people are free to choose with whoever they seem fit, the civic and political illiteracy cannot be viewed as anything but disastrous, as the level of democratic discourse of politicians will constantly lower in order to appeal to the changing population. Similarly, to an uneducated voter, a faithful that lacks adequate intellectual depth is at risk of being tricked, fall for demagoguery, or algorithmic manipulation, and potentially losing the rational tools of discernment. Eastern Orthodox Christianity, with its rich liturgical life, patristic teachings, and traditional depth, is also vulnerable to the effects of the declining literacy phenomenon. Unlike recent Christian traditions that may adopt more easily to pop culture spirituality and charismatic practices, Orthodoxy requires a sort of religious literacy, which involves familiarity with symbolic language, biblical allusions, being familiar with church fathers or the lives of the saints, hymnography, and the sacred days of the calendar. As literacy declines, fewer and fewer Orthodox faithful are equipped to read and understand the liturgical hymns, let alone the writings of church fathers, such as St. John Chrysostom, St. Gregory Palamas, or works like Philokalia. Within the West, the Orthodox communities do not usually have an already established Orthodox ethos within their groups, and are subjected to secular pressures regarding intellectualism and elitism, which, coupled with the loss of literacy, makes it harder for the faithful to remain connected with the Church. The majority of Orthodox converts are people that join the Church through reading, inquiry, and careful examination of Church history. Theology and philosophy may find fewer opportunities for sustained theological study in the future due to the decline in literacy. Literary rates do not only affect the layperson, but also the clerics or people that would become clerics, but are unable to due to restrictions pertaining to having some academic qualifications before joining the seminary. For example, in most Orthodox seminaries from the U.S., in order to join, you would have to initially have a bachelor's degree in something first. This is the socio-economic context where colleges are not free like in Eastern Europe. So higher education expenses are a real factor in determining a person's intellectual progress and limitations. As a side note, we all know somebody that wishes to become a priest, but is unable to due to not finishing high school or not having a bachelor's degree, since becoming a priest requires a master's degree. Sometimes, the most passionate people about the faith are also the least learned intellectually speaking, and that can create problems within the Orthodox communities abroad. This issue of availability of priesthood is currently a top priority for all Orthodox jurisdictions across North America, since seminarians are getting fewer and fewer each year, despite more and more people getting baptized into the church. So far, there are only two solutions to resolving the lack of priests problem: either promoting this vocation to more men that went to colleges or universities and are intellectually apt, or downgrade the program so that people with little or no academic qualifications can apply. The first option is currently the preferred one, but will soon create a crisis due to its lack of success, while the second view risks turning the Orthodox priesthood into people that just perform the services without much intellectual engagement or theology, or without being able to provide much rational counseling to their flock. There are many voices within the Orthodox sphere that think that a return to the past, in which anybody could qualify to be an Orthodox priest as long as he was somewhat moral and could read, write, and perform the sacred rites. Because of the lowering of literacy in the West, this possibility seems closer to us than ever before. A third option is a relatively unpopular one, but it is one that we support if the initial option fails, is to recruit foreign-born Orthodox priests from traditionally Orthodox countries to come and serve in the U.S., just like how the Catholic Church usually does, despite its far larger population. Their literacy rates are even worse than the U.S. average, since a large portion of Catholics are Hispanics from Mexico or other Latino countries that do not have a firm grasp of the English language and have issues adapting to the American society. In the Orthodox case, the ethnicities that are traditionally Orthodox, like Greeks, Russians, and Romanians, are usually more integrated into the American society and share more of their values, which, unfortunately, do not include joining the priesthood. So even though there's an available diaspora for homegrown priesthood, there is little interest for it within those communities. This is a topic that we would like to explore further down the line after gathering more data about it. The sociology of conversion. Who is drawn to Orthodoxy today? We have tried creating a sociological profile of those most drawn to Orthodox Christianity in the United States of America and other Western contexts. The results are quite interesting. Converts seem to be disproportionately drawn from the middle to upper class, and they tend to be well-educated, intellectually curious, and culturally literate. These individuals often have backgrounds in evangelical, Catholic, or mainline Protestant traditions, and they are seeking to go back to the Christian roots and discover the early church, doctrinal coherence, and spiritual seriousness. Here are 5 elements that were considered by us. Education and intellectual curiosity. It is commonly asserted that Orthodoxy's theological depth, grounding in the writings of the Church Fathers, together with the sacred liturgical mysticism, represents major sources of attraction to converts that are academically oriented. The unique philosophical system that Orthodoxy adheres to also tends to reach out to truth seekers that want to explore a more ancient approach to viewing and understanding God, outside of the Western scholastic tradition which dominates the Catholic Church, but also its offspring, the Protestants and the Neo-Protestants. Many converts discover Orthodoxy through reading patristic texts, modern theological works, or apologetical books. Additionally, the wide availability of Orthodox content through platforms like Ancient Faith Radio, YouTube lectures, Orthodox podcasts, and of course, debates and discussions with members of other faiths, has further facilitated intellectual exploration for those who value rigorous inquiry. Unlike 10 years ago, today we have an abundance of Orthodox content creators, which is directly linked to the sharp rise of new converts and catechumens flocking to Orthodox churches. Aesthetically inclined. Orthodoxy's emphasis on beauty through iconography, chanting, and vestments resonates with those who have spiritual cravings and have been left unsatisfied with Western contemporary worship styles. Many converts and catechumens have stated that the divine liturgy can feel like a rediscovery of a sacred mystery, appealing to every part of their sensory system, visual, auditive, and olfactive. Beautiful and unique aesthetics within an Orthodox church has been cited numerous times as being the main reason why people were drawn towards Orthodoxy, even before delving into the theology, highlighting how liturgical beauty and sacredness can act as a spiritual magnet of sorts. Even within the history of the Church, we find preeminent examples of when church beauty and solemn liturgical worship have convinced people groups to convert to our faith, such as the case with Kievan Rus. Rejection of modernity. Another important aspect for people's conversion to Orthodoxy is our Church's attitude towards recent religious trends. In a way, conversion to Orthodoxy is the most radical anti-modernist statement that one can make, rejecting the contemporary consumerist mindset, prosperity gospel, or the black hole that the modern liberal society forces upon us. To many, Orthodoxy offers a countercultural identity, a faith that resists innovation and that anchors itself in ancient tradition, that has passed the test of time, while also demanding personal transformation from a secular man to a religious one, through prayer, asceticism, and sacramental participation. This appeal is especially strong amongst those disillusioned with religious and cultural trends that appear theologically shallow or politically oppressive, in a world in which every ideology, faith, and political movement tends to place itself in a position from which to appeal to the widest audience possible. The Orthodox Church is more focused in its target audience and tries hard to reject bending the knee to secular ethics and its feel-good, leave-me-alone, accept-me theology. Cultural openness. A different element pertaining to people's decision to convert to Orthodoxy is related to their cultural openness. Orthodoxy in the West is still based off immigrants coming from various Eastern European countries, and their ethos remains distinctly ethnical compared to the secular spirit of the broader American society. That is not to say that these Orthodox communities are closed off or sealed in any way. Greeks and Romanians, for example, are famous for their hospitality and openness to foreigners, whether ethnical or religious. But, at the same time, it is not irrational for them to continue maintaining their customs within the religious sphere and not hazardously adopt new habits that risk disrupting the tried and tested Orthodox ethos that has been achieved. That is not to say that the elements of a culture or an entire culture cannot be eventually baptized in the Church, after it was carefully vetted and changed in order to fully fit the Orthodox ethos. But this complex process takes time, a lot of time, decades, if not centuries. There is a great risk of falling into the secular trap of cultural relativism, in which all cultures are made equal, or worse, are equal in the eyes of God, despite some cultures having problematic practices that in no way are compatible with the Church teachings. There is a great deal of practices, but just to name a few: placing the Constitution above the Church, accepting of polygamy, ancestor worship, religious syncretism, or far Eastern spiritual and physical practices like yoga. While the cultural aspect of joining the Orthodox Church will definitely be a barrier for a number of people, at the same time, it is a test of sorts to see whether they would put their culture or civilization over the truth, as only those who prepare to have their worldview changed may progress forward. That is not to say that everybody has to become Greek, Russian, or anything else, nor adopt all their non-religious practices and customs, as the main goal of a church within a state is to create a national church for the nation, not to culturally convert it. Resource access. The last aspect discussed here is about resource availability, access, and allocation strategy. As many people can testify, the journey into Orthodoxy demands time, reading, prayer, and even traveling options. These types of resources are usually more readily available to those from stable socioeconomic backgrounds. The serious decision to convert comes after years of exploration and introspection, and converts often cite as reasons for conversion complex topics such as understanding abstract theology, knowledge regarding church history, and have some sort of philosophical grounding. As an example, it is not initially obvious for an outsider why the Orthodox Church is correct among the other apostolic churches, such as the Catholics, Orientals, or Church of the East. Issues such as the Filioque, Nestorianism, and Miaphysitism require a bit more than historical research in order to grasp. Since higher education is not free in the U.S. and most of the West, then access to knowledge and logical tools are barred from the population that does not have the financial means of supporting a college degree. This, however, does not mean that other layers of the population cannot join the Orthodox Church, which is actually happening more and more. On this note, we wholeheartedly support the missionary efforts of the various Orthodox jurisdictions to establish more conversion centers in the heart of America, especially in the Midwest and in the South, zones which contain a spiritually hungry population that lacks easy access to Orthodox churches but are very much interested in the faith. Together, These 5 factors reveal a somewhat distinct convert demographic: educated, aesthetically inclined, traditionalists, culturally curious, and have enough resources for extensive study. This is a generalization and does not reflect every single convert, nor does this essay aim to. Thus, the literacy crisis can directly impact the conversion rate of people to Orthodoxy. This means that in order for the conversion process to continue, then the Orthodox jurisdictions might have to change their missionary strategy and move from dense, diverse, and liberal urban centers into rural localities, in which the culture is more compact and conservative. Perceptions of Orthodox converts among other Christian traditions. The rise of Orthodoxy within the U.S. has not gone unnoticed, and various churches and denominations have started preparing a response against what they perceive to be proselytizing of a foreign, un-American faith. Among evangelicals and Protestants, there is often a mix of curiosity, cautious admiration, and moderate suspicion. Converts to Orthodoxy are sometimes perceived as intellectuals or idealists seeking historical grounding and a direct connection to the Church of the Apostles. Some Protestants actually respect this endeavor to search for the truth all the way, while others critique it as an escape into legalism or ritualism, which the Reformation fought against. Among Roman Catholics, there's also a weird dichotomy. Some view Orthodox converts with a sense of kinship and friendship, recognizing the sacred rituals, apostolic succession, and tradition of 1,000 years. Others, however, express concern about the perceived rigidity or cultural specificity of Orthodoxy. There is also across all traditions a quiet tension brewing, the movement of highly educated and spiritually serious Christians into Orthodoxy, such as the recent case of Dr. Joshua Sijuwade, can be interpreted as an implicit critique of other denominations' approaches to worship, theology, philosophy, attitude towards secularist principles, and overall church life. It can challenge churches to examine their own teachings and customs in order to better cope with the shifting religious demographics. We are all heading towards a great divide not seen in history for a long time, possibly never, in which 2 types of churches will emerge. One focused on traditional values, sacramentality, and historical link that is appealing to an educated audience, and the other one will emphasize the raw connection with people and their emotions, putting to the side the deep theological disputes for more simplistic and modern takes of the faith. Anything in between risks extinction or being swallowed up by one of these 2 sides. As of now, in the aftermath of Pope Francis's death, the whole world holds its breath to see whether the Catholic Church will continue down the path of democratization and secularization of its faith, or perhaps make a dramatic U-turn which will try to steer the culture of the Church backwards, just like Donald Trump tries to do with the American civilization. This is the last Hail Mary of an old world that does not yet realize it is already dead, and that a new strategy needs to be developed in order to counter those that are now in power and dictating the direction of secularism, ecumenism, and liberalism. What will happen next, only God knows, but what is certain is that we live during times of change, in which churches of old seem disinterested to maintain their old customs and culture, and instead wish to embrace a more global approach, an approach aimed at focusing on the global south and recentering the focal point of faith from pan-European lands, Europe and North America, into other continents. These fundamental changes will mark the rift between what was before and what comes next, and it will be a greater reminder for the Orthodox Church to be careful about how she relates to the secular trends surrounding her, lest she might get engulfed as well. As an overall conclusion, the fall in literacy in the United States does not simply mean that fewer people can read a Bible. It also implies that fewer people can understand, interpret, and wrestle with the language of faith. It risks changing the fundamental aspect of belief from community to consumption, which you can check out our other video about treating the Orthodox Church as a given if you want to learn more about it. Catechism is replaced by charisma, deep study is abandoned in favor of fake intellectualism, and the arduous path towards the truth is sidelined in order to make way for fast food apologetics and gotcha clips. It will shift religion and faith from a shared experience in Jesus Christ to a collection of likes, impressions, and reactions on a YouTube or TikTok channel. But that is why we must not give up and fight to maintain our church, despite the difficult times that will be coming. All is not lost, but we must be smart, vigilant, and pragmatic about it. Thank you for watching, and we hope you learned something new from this video. God bless.